we're continuing with the sermon series called Misquoted, and we're taking these everyday verses that we have and we're finding Jesus in them. You know these everyday verses, verses that we know really well, that we may not even know where they are in the Bible, but they just become part of our everyday kind of language. And today is one of them indeed. It is Isaiah 55 verse 8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. Did you guys catch it in the reading that Kevin was doing? You were like, oh, I know that one. Right? That's an everyday verse, right? It's every day. It's always there. And so as we begin this, how does this verse usually get used? How does this get used normally? Yeah, it's normally like when something bad is happening, right? Like, why do bad things happen to good people? There we go. Why do bad things happen to good people, right? Like that's why a hurricane is bearing in on it, like, oh, why is God allowing these bad things to happen to good people? Or you have like New Orleans and you had like all the TV preachers and stuff like that are like, oh, the evil people in New Orleans, that's why God sent the hurricane to cleanse it out, right? You know, that's how this is like, well, I don't know how it happens. God's ways are higher than our ways. Which is true, but that's not really what's going on in our verse today. That's not really what's going on. And that's kind of what we're going to get at, because what he actually means by my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways is actually really fascinating, and it's encouraging for us all. And it's really good news. And hopefully I can communicate that idea to you. So to begin with this, you know, we have the verse here. To begin this is we need to ask a question. We need to ask a question. And that question is, what does a good Christian look like? Right? What popped in your head? Right? What does a good Christian look like? Khaki pants and a polo tucked in? Is that what a good Christian looks like? I don't know. Pleated khakis, right? That's what a good Christian is, right? That's what does a good Christian look like to you? You know, is it someone that follows the golden rule, treats others the way they want to be treated? You know, someone that lives a morally pure life? You think someone that they're kind of selflessly serves others. You know, you might think of someone who loves their family and raises them right, whatever that means. You know, like they raise them right. You know, typically you think of someone's a good person, right? You know, a good person. I know, I hate all that too, Gunrick. It's awful. Like that's, yeah, it's the good. It's the good Christian. What is a good Christian there? That's kind of the question that we have. And I need to make a connection for you, because we asked at the beginning, why does bad things happen to good people? You should be making that connection to this one right now. All right? Like why does all of this happen here? Yeah, so we need to talk about someone who's a bad person for a second. We need to talk about someone who's a bad person. In our gospel lesson, we see that it's a story about Matthew the tax collector, and you guys need to know what you got to do as soon as you hear tax collector. You guys know, as soon as you read the Bible and you hear tax collector, what do you have to do? You got to go boo, right? You need to cry like Gunrick over there, right? Like we love having him in here. But that's like, no. So let's try it again. So we have our gospel lesson, and it's about Jesus and this tax collector. Boo. Exactly. Boo. Boo. These people are terrible. It's like extortion. 50% tax rates. They're skimming off the top. It's awful. Like if there was a baddie group of people, the tax collectors were it. They were terrible. And yet we have a photograph of the event of Jesus in Matthew, the tax collector. Right? That's what we have here. And the Pharisees say, that's not what good Christians do. Well, they may not have said good Christians, but that's not what good Christians do. They don't hang out with all of those sinners over there. They don't hang out with them. And they even say that in Matthew 9:11. They say, why does your teacher eat with all these tax collectors and sinners? That's not what good Christians do. And what should happen to the bad people? To the bad people? What should happen to them? Well, in Hosea, it says that they should be thrown into the thorns and the thistles. They should be punished, right? That you may think that bad people need to be sent to the bad place where the fire constantly goes, to what in the English translation it's translated hell. In Greek it's Gehenna. It's like the town dump. It's where the pagans used to perform child sacrifices, so they made it the dump. And Jesus said you wouldn't need to be thrown into there. Into these thorns and these thistles, just these thorny lives, right? Like that's, and you start seeing what we were talking about in the confession, about how Genesis talks about this life of briars and thorns that come up. And the prophets regularly use them as what a life of all the baddies looks like, right? That it looks like these thorns and these thistles. So let's actually get into our text for a little bit. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 7. You're welcome to pull out a Bible. It'll be on the screen too. We're kind of going to go through the latter half of it. It's in your bulletin too if you want to follow along. But that's Isaiah 55, verse 7. But to set up a little bit of background, the first half of Isaiah is him warning the Israelites, hey, you guys need to shape up. You need to shape up. Basically what he's saying, you guys need to quit looking like Babylon, quit acting like Babylon, or God is going to put you in exile in Babylon. We're going to talk more about this during Lent. So you need to quit looking like Babylon, or God's going to put you into Babylon if you want to look like it so much. So they're worshiping false gods. They're not being a light to the nations. They're not taking care of their own people. They're just only thinking about what's good for themselves. So Isaiah is warning them that the Babylonians are going to come in and haul them off to exile, and they're going to lose their very livelihoods. He warns them that they're going to be thrown into the thistles and the briars. And the second half of Isaiah is them in exile. It's like in the future that they are in exile, and Isaiah changes his tune. It's not so much the doom and gloom anymore, but it's that God is going to redeem you. And you're like, redeem? What does that mean? I redeem coupons all the time. But what does redeem mean? I define redeem as meaning he makes us better. He makes us new. He makes all things good again. That he's redeeming the society. He's redeeming all of us. And that's what Isaiah is talking about in the end, because the people had lost everything. And they were certain that God was punishing them for not following him, that they had been punished. They had been those bad people, and they didn't even deserve to be rescued. They were as thorny as it got. And I think we in our own lives can understand that a little bit. I operate kind of underneath the theory that in all of us, there's that little voice that often is screaming in the back of our heads, right, or in the depths of our soul, that says, you are not good enough. That you did that when you were 12, and that's why your mother and you had that terrible relationship. Right? There's a voice down in the midst of us that says that you cannot overcome it. And we try to cover it up by all these different things, right? We may cover it up with pride, we may cover up all this, but there's this deep inadequacy. Maybe I'm just revealing myself to you guys, that I have this deep inadequacy inside of me that says that you cannot do it. You know, like and I think that we all kind of exist in that, and we have these voices that come from somewhere that gives us that guilty feeling that's like, oh man, I messed that up. I've messed this up. I can't measure up that I can't live through this anymore. I have really screwed this up. It's that small voice, that deep feeling of inadequacy. And that is kind of what God's people were feeling. It's like, man, we really screwed this up. We really messed this up. We're in the midst of exile. We're in the midst of Babylon. And it's awful. And that's what Isaiah is talking to. He's talking to that person. He's talking to the people that, as the Old Testament describes it, that are in the pit of Sheol. You know what Sheol is? Sometimes people are like, oh, that's just hell. Like, it's a little more nuanced than that. Sheol is the grave, the ground where the dead lay. That I'm in the pit of the dead. You know, that's how they describe their own state here. That they are in the thorns and the briars. But listen to what Isaiah promises here. We have the scripture up here, and this is what he says. This is where he starts talking about redemption. It says, "Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him when he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon." You see which way he's going? He's like, let the unrighteous man his thoughts, let him return to the Lord, that God may have compassion on him, and to our God, that he will abundantly pardon. What's that sound like? That sounds like God is this all-forgiving God, right? He's this all-forgiving, that you are in exile, that you are in that pit of Sheol, that you are in the briars and the thorns of your own life, and you just can't see the way out. And he says he's going to abundantly pardon. And what's the very next verse? All of a sudden you see the context. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord." Do you see how he's using that verse? Do you see how it's set there? It's not so much like, why does bad things happen to good people? It's that everything in our minds say that the baddies deserve the thorns, right? That the baddies deserve the pit of Sheol. That oftentimes I'm baddie and I deserve the thorns and the pit of Sheol, right? Like that the wicked deserve all of that. But God doesn't think like that. But God doesn't think like that. Because if we continue reading on, we see that, "For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in feasts, that the mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing," like the little pig there. "They break forth into singing, and all the trees of the fields shall clap their hands." What's this image? Like the hills will break forth into singing. This isn't just sound of music, like someone singing on a hill. Like the hill will actually break forth into singing. What is this? It's creation, right? The whole creation is not so thorny all of a sudden. And we get to the next verse, and check this out. "And instead the thorn shall come up a cypress. Instead of the briar shall come up a myrtle." Remember what we talked about before, that in Genesis 3, in the curse of all sin, that briars and thorns came up into the creation, right? Was evidence of our sin, but evidence of God's redemption is the thorny bits and the briary bits. Those rough parts will be made into beautiful flowers and be made fruitful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful imagery. And hopefully by us talking about thorn all this whole time, hopefully you can get an image that I've been alluding to this whole sermon. If not, we can throw that image up. Have you ever thought, like, why is there a crown of thorns on top of Jesus' head? It's because the curse brought the thorns in Genesis chapter 3. And Jesus took on all of our thorny bits, all of the briars, all of those inadequacies, all that feeling that we couldn't measure up, all that feeling. Have you ever been stuck in a briar because you had a friend push you into it, right? All of that sin, Christ took all of that onto himself on the cross, that he might turn all of our briars into myrtles, that he might bring our unfruitfulness, the stuff that we throw away into the fire, and turn it into a fruitful garden. I think about this. Jesus, he eats. This is another photograph of this event with Matthew. That he eats with thorns and briars. He eats with tax collectors and sinners. Remember, tax collectors, boo, right? He eats with them. And one of those tax collectors ended up writing the Gospel of Matthew. Something that has brought life and fruitfulness to the world for years and years. That he has brought that. One might say that Jesus turned thorns into myrtles, right? He's brought you out of your pit, and he brings you into the marvelous light. So we ourselves, we do some pretty briary things sometimes. Sometimes we're pretty thorny, and we cause thorniness to other people. It just happens. Some of you are real jerks, all right? It's true. So, yeah. Sometimes that's me, though, too, right? Very rarely, though, very rarely do I cause the thorniness, right? Yeah. But God turns the thorniness into myrtles, into flowers. And that's good news for all of us. Because we're told a line that on the great and glorious day of the Lord, there's going to be this pruning back, and all the thorny bits are going to be thrown away and burned and thrown into the fire. And that's true. But also what's true is that before that, Jesus turns the thorny bits and the briar into myrtle and fruitful trees. And that's my hope. That's my hope, is that my thorny bits and how I've upset people and all that stuff will be turned into fruitfulness that can bring life and sustain to the rest of the creation. So Jesus takes on our briarness, and he gives us his myrtleness. He gives life to his creation. So listen, talking in coded language this whole time. You are forgiven. Hold on to that. You are forgiven because of what Jesus does. And that's really good news. And you know what? It doesn't make any sense because God's ways are higher than our ways. And his thoughts are higher than our thoughts.